This here is the MacBook Air M2. It is the first major physical redesign of the MacBook Air since it was launched way back in 2008. The last version, the M1 powered MacBook Air, was very well received in 2020. In fact, the M1 MacBook Air was perhaps as close as it comes to perfection in terms of a compact laptop. This here promises to up the ante in terms of performance and also brings the MacBook Air up to date in terms of design and in line with the rest of the Apple's lineup. So what's it like and who's it for? Let's find out in this video. So I've actually chosen the Starlight color this time to go along with my Starlight Apple Watch and also an iPad mini 6 that I have. And this is the base model, so it's the 256GB, 8GB RAM version. So let's unbox this without further ado. And there we are. Here's the MacBook itself, nice and compact after having handled the bigger 16-inch MacBook Pros. And we get the color-coded MagSafe cable right there. Besides that, you have the regulatory information, the documentation, as well as the Apple stickers, which are again mashed to the laptop in Starlight. So this is the UK model, so you've got the UK spec power adapter. This is the base variant, so it's only a 30-watt adapter. Now on to the main event itself. This is the MacBook Air M2 in the Starlight color. And there we are. And there's the Starlight M2 MacBook Air. As you can see, nice and compact. And this time there is no wedge shape. It's completely flat from all sides, but still nice and light to hold. Feels like a premium product as always. Automatically starts up as soon as you open the lid. And there we are. I reviewed the MacBook Air M1 in 2020 quite extensively, and there were largely positive things to say about it. However, it was not infallible, and it had its issues being a first generation product. So what has 2 years of evolution done to the computer, and what improvements has it brought about? Well, looking at the design itself, it feels very much like a shrunken version of Apple's larger MacBook Pro laptops. Design-wise, the laptop is light enough and you're not losing anything by losing that wedge shape. So even though this is completely squared off, it is still just as compact as the previous Air. Unfortunately, you only get those two USB Type-C ports or the Thunderbolt ports on one side instead of both sides. You only have the headphone jack there, which is a missed opportunity. Because even though we've gained MagSafe, that means both of these are free entirely for peripherals if you're using the MagSafe charger. But the problem is that sometimes you have accessories that you want to plug on the other side. So that's definitely a missed opportunity even on this Air. I was really hoping to see one on each side at least, if not more. If you want a compact laptop, you really can't beat this. It really feels much less chunkier than even the smaller MacBook Pros. And there's almost no comparison when you compare it to the MacBook Pro M1 16-inch. So when it comes to performance, the MacBook Air M1 was truly revolutionary. It wasn't so much about outright performance, but more a combination of power and efficiency that made it stand out amongst other compact laptops. Here, the M2 chip is up to 1.4 times faster than M1 machines for the most demanding tasks such as video editing. The difference is much more dramatic when it comes to a comparison with Intel-based MacBook Airs. That is indeed a target market for Apple, people who are still using Intel machines and had skipped the M1 Air either in wait for a physical redesign or perhaps they just didn't see a need to upgrade just yet. Well, going by initial impressions, everything seems fluid and fast even on this base spec 8GB machine, as you would expect. My testing with the M1 machines showed that one thing these really benefit from is added RAM, unless you use them for very light duty tasks. This time you can go all the way up to 24GB of RAM, and that is the level I would recommend given the fact that my MacBook Pro M1 Max with 32GB of RAM mostly sits at around 40 to 50% RAM usage. So it's safe to say that with 24GB, the MacBook Air M1 will not feel stretched even under load. The lack of an active cooling system can be an issue, but frankly, even when I was using the MacBook Air M1 as my main editing machine, the lack of a fan only meant longer export times for videos. The RAM aspect had far greater implications for usability than the lack of active cooling. The display is super sharp and crisp, and pushing it to the corners really brings this laptop to the 2020s rather than the late noughties where it started its life. In fact, I prefer the resolution on this to bigger MacBook Pros like the 16-inch, so reading on this is a joy. It's also 100 nits brighter at 500 nits now. Perhaps the only fly in the ointment is the notch. Now here's where it gets interesting. Initially, it did not bug me at all to have a notch on the much larger 16-inch MacBook Pro M1 Max. But having lived with it for nearly a year, it is really irritating for the simple reason that the menu bar cannot display too many widgets. If you're a power user, if you're always connected to an external display, then this is a non-issue. But when we still don't see Face ID in the new MacBook Air, the utility of having the notch is questionable. In fact, I find it less obtrusive on the iPhone 13 Pro Max than I do on the MacBook Pro and Air. The M2 MacBook Air also gets a 1080p camera that is crisp and effective, as you would hope it to be, as are the speakers, not like a 16-inch MacBook Pro, but really good nonetheless. So the audio you hear now and the video you see is coming out of the MacBook Air M2 speakers, and it is completely based on the microphone and speakers of the MacBook Air M2. I'm not using the Rode mic that you see on my lapel at the moment, and I think it does a pretty good job. So who should upgrade to the new M2 Air? I think anyone with Intel MacBooks can give this laptop a serious consideration, especially if your workflow does not involve lengthy sessions of CPU intensive tasks that would benefit from an active cooling system. Anyone with an M1 MacBook should wait. This is still a beautiful redesign, but the incremental upgrades over those machines are still not big enough to justify the added expense. Look at it this way: if you don't need a new iPhone every year, then you don't need the M2 Air. If you already have the M1 Air, perhaps the only exception would be if you have a machine with only 8 GB of RAM and you know you will benefit from more. Then you can spec up the new Air and get the latest design as part of the deal. So, if you have any questions or would like me to test this on any particular aspect, please let me know in the comments below. I will see you in an update video on this on other aspects soon. Thanks for watching, and please consider subscribing to this channel.